Everyone, good afternoon. Thank you so much for being here today. We have a packed agenda and a lot of great information to share with you. So we are now going to start our webinar, Serving 3-Year-Olds. A few housekeeping items. You all are currently on mute. If you have any questions, please type in your question using the question section of the control panel of GoToWebinar. We will be answering any logistical questions, or if you have any technical difficulties, we'll answer it through the question section of GoToWebinar. Any content-related questions we'll probably get to at the end of the webinar. If we run out of time for questions, we'll respond to them via email. So please be sure to type them throughout the webinar and we will get to them either today or tomorrow. Also, a copy of this presentation is available in the handouts section of the control panel. And lastly, this webinar is being recorded and will be made available to anyone who missed it. We will post it on the Early Childhood Education webinar page on TEA's website. Today we're going to do brief introductions, and then we will dive into key areas in serving 4-year-olds and 3-year-olds. The key areas include curriculum, instruction, assessment, learning environment, enrollment, eligibility, attendance, teacher qualifications, ratios, and data reporting. At the end of the presentation, we will review resources, and then we'll have time for questions and answers. First, we want to introduce ourselves. My name is Cassie Longoria, and I'm an Early Childhood Education Program Specialist here at TEA.
And good afternoon. My name is Tamala Olsby, and I am also an Early Childhood Education Program Specialist at TEA.
Before we dive in deep into the webinar, we wanted to do a quick poll to determine if your district is currently serving 3-year-olds. Using your internet browser or your cell phone, go to www.slido.com and enter the code serving3s. From there, you'll be able to answer the question. I'll give everyone just a couple minutes to get on and answer the question. All right, we have a couple answers coming through. So far, we have the majority of you are serving 3-year-olds, with a few of you stating that your district is not serving 3-year-olds. And we'll wait just a little bit longer to see. Okay, so for those of you who responded, we had about 80% state that your district is currently serving 3-year-olds, and 14% stated you're not serving 3-year-olds, and a few of you are unsure, most likely because sometimes only some campuses serve 3s and not all campuses. But regardless, this is consistent with what we are hearing from you all in the field, that more and more of you are serving 3-year-olds. So we hope that this webinar will provide clarity on how to do that. This data on this slide is from the 2016-2017 school year. It shows that 10% of eligible 3-year-olds are enrolled in public pre-kindergarten in Texas. I'll be curious to see what the data shows for the 2017-2018 school year to see if that has increased. But as I mentioned, we are hearing from more and more of you that more of your districts are starting to serve 3s. And so we hope that this webinar will provide you with some helpful information on how to successfully do so.
All righty, this is Tamala. We have tried to pick some key areas or topics that pertain to serving 3-year-olds to go over today. And these topics that we are talking about are the ones that we here at TEA get the most questions about. So these are the specific topics, just like Cassie told you in the agenda, that we will be covering today. The first one is curriculum. So what are the differences if you are serving 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds as far as curriculum is concerned? The way we've set this up is the items on the left-hand side of your slide pertain to 4-year-olds, and the items on the right-hand side of the slide pertain to 3-year-olds. The things that are in a black font are true of both of them. So you will see both of them. Curriculum should be aligned with the 2015 Texas Pre-K guidelines. The curriculums that have been reviewed and have been determined to align with the Texas Prekindergarten guidelines are included on the instructional materials list. And there's also the issue of when you are using curriculum, you obviously want to make sure it is age appropriate, but also that it is individually appropriate for each child in the classroom. So on this slide, you will see that the major differences are when you are serving 3-year-olds, there may be children who developmentally are not at a 3.0 age bracket yet. And therefore, the Texas Pre-K guidelines only go down to a 3-year-old level. So you may want to consider using the infant, toddler, and 3-year-old early learning guidelines for children that are developmentally younger than the age of 3. The other item that we want to bring to your attention is not all of the curriculum listed on the instructional materials list are geared toward 3-year-olds. There are some curriculums on that list whose age level specifically says 4-year-olds. And so if you might want to check to make sure that the curriculum that you are currently using in your program is appropriate both for 3-year-olds and for 4-year-olds. I'm going to give you a couple of examples of what you would see in looking at the Texas Pre-K guidelines. On this slide, you will notice that this is out of the social emotional development section. And the first column has a heading that says by around 48 months of age. The second column's heading says end of pre-kindergarten year outcomes. So when you see that in the Texas Pre-K guidelines, what you want to know is the first column is really for the 3-year-old classes. And children should be aiming toward, and activities done in the room should be geared toward getting children to that level before they reach the age of 4 or by the time they reach 4. The second column's objectives should be reached by the time the child is exiting pre-kindergarten. So in this example, it says for the 3-year-olds, child may overestimate or underestimate their own abilities. And by the end of the pre-kindergarten year, it says child shows reasonable opinion of his own abilities and limitations. If a great example, in my opinion, of this is if you're on the playground and there are 3- and 4-year-olds on the playground, and the playground equipment is a little challenging. Sometimes you get 3-year-olds stuck places because they thought they could climb that high, and basically what they've done is they've overestimated their own abilities. Often 4-year-olds will look at a piece of playground equipment and they'll say, I can do that, or they will not want to try because they know their limitations. So that's, I think, a good example. I'm going to show you one more. This one is out of the Emergent Literacy Writing section of the 2015 Texas Pre-K Guidelines. And you will again notice the heading of the first column says by around 48 months of age, and the second column is by the end of the pre-kindergarten year. So if you'll look on the first one, so the 3-year-olds, it says the child records own name in whatever manner she is able. So that's pretty basic. So that is telling a 3-year-old teacher that probably all kids need to have writing opportunities, but it probably would not be a high expectation that all the 3-year-olds in the classroom are going to be able to write their name by the end of the 3-year-old year. But look at the end of the pre-K year. Child writes own name, first name, or frequent nickname using legible letters in proper sequence. So there's a huge difference between the age of 3 and 4 in what is expected in this particular strategy. So things that you might want to consider is the pre-K 3 and the pre-K 4 curriculum could have some differences. Notice I said could. So those differences might include the activities that are done during the day, even the schedule of the day. You might, if you're serving 3-year-olds, consider using the infant, toddler, and 3-year-old early learning guidelines for children that are developmentally young. And if you're concerned about the curriculum and its use with 3-year-olds, we would recommend that you ask your curriculum's publisher for some support if you're having difficulty using the curriculum for 3-year-olds. It is a good practice to develop a scope and sequence document to ensure that all the concepts and skills that we want children to have down really well before kindergarten are not only introduced, but they're reinforced and they're practiced throughout the 2 years if you have a 3-year-old program. So it's nice to have a scope and sequence so that the 3-year-old teachers know what their expectations are and the 4-year-old teachers know what their expectations are. It is also a good practice to use teacher meetings to support horizontal alignment. So what I mean by horizontal alignment is that we should be trying to ensure that students are experiencing the same content in the same grade level, so that the 3-year-olds have the same or a common content and the 4-year-olds have a common content. They might have some content similar to one another, but there should also be some differences, and we're going to talk about that a little later in the webinar. It's also a good idea to use teacher meetings to support vertical alignment, just to make sure that between the 3-year-old level and the 4-year-old level, that all of those skills and content and concepts are being built upon so that we have really good positive child outcomes. We're going to go now on to instruction. And again, you will notice that on the left-hand side is the pre-K 4, on the right side is the pre-K 3. The print in black is what is similar. So when you're looking at instruction that is going on in the pre-K4 classroom, the majority of the day should be spent in either small group instruction, individual instruction, or in learning centers. And play and hands-on instructions should be used to support the whole child. The threes are really exactly the same, minus one small difference. The amount of time that you would spend in either small group instruction, individual instruction, or the learning centers might be shortened or lengthened because of the difference in age. So things to consider when you're thinking about instruction and what would be a difference between the threes and fours. You might be mindful of the amount of time that younger children are participating, especially in large group instruction, and especially at the beginning of the school year. You might want to alter the daily schedule for the younger students to minimize the transitions and allow more time for play and hands-on activities, especially in the learning centers. It is good to establish routines to help young children feel secure. That is true of both ages, but it is really important with 3-year-olds. And lastly, but not least, this is very, very important. Things that are considered self-care activities, such as toileting, hand washing, meal times, should be considered part of the daily instruction. Those 3-year-olds just take a lot more time to do all of those things. Our next subject is assessment. And you will notice again that we have the 2 columns. In assessment, it is recommended that you are using an assessment instrument that is on the commissioner's list. That is also true of 3-year-olds. It is recommended that you are using data to inform your classroom instruction, that you try to get input from the family on items that the child can or cannot do, and that through the assessment process, you might want to refer or ask for some interventions for children that you think might need further evaluation. For 3-year-olds, we also want to point out that on the commissioner's list, there are assessment instruments that are only for 4-year-olds. So you probably want to look at that commissioner's list, and I'm going to jump ahead just because I think this will help. This is the front page of the commissioner's list, and you will see all of the approved instruments listed there, with a lot of other information. But you will notice on this page, it does not say anything about being for a 4-year-old or for a 3-year-old. When you look at this list, and we will have, actually there's the link on the bottom of the slide. When you look at that, after this front page, there is a page for each instrument. So for instance, after this front page, there is a page on circle. Then there's a page on dial 4. Then there's a page on work sampling system, et cetera, et cetera. And on those other pages, it will tell you whether the assessment instrument is for what ages. Is it only for 4s? Is it for everything from birth to 5? Is it for 3s and 4s? So you might want to check that out. So I'm going to go back now. So there is a little bit of difference, mainly because I think there is the assumption that every instrument on that commissioner's list is appropriate for both 3s and 4s, and that just really isn't true. The next thing that we just want to bring to your attention is that really accurate assessment information is really difficult with younger children. The younger the child is, the more difficult it is to get accurate assessment information. Don't let that concern you. Do the best you can, but don't be surprised when one day you thought the child couldn't do something and then the next day the 3-year-old could do it. You will also notice that we have said that there might be an increased need of family input. And the reason for that is because the accurate assessment information is more difficult with younger students. So it might be to your advantage to ask more questions of the family so that you are getting as much information at the beginning of the year as you can, so that that information can inform your instruction. So things to consider in assessment is to check that commissioner's list to make sure that the tool that you are using has been intended to be used both with 3- and 4-year-olds. Teachers should use the assessment information to create their class activity plans. It is always best practice to seek family input on what does the child know and what can the child do, and that is especially true with younger children. And then it is also true of both age groups that the assessment data that you are collecting can be used to identify supports that the child may end up needing. Our next subject is the learning environment. And so we're going to talk a little bit about, are there differences in the classroom and the outdoors for a 3-year-old versus a 4-year-old? You will see that it is expected that both age groups have 7 learning centers. And of course, that is dependent on the size of your classroom. I mean, there's a lot of variables, but the size of the classroom is a huge one. Notice what we have written under the 3-year-olds. You may want to gradually introduce the 7 centers. This is actually true of 4-year-olds too. But with 3-year-olds, you even want to go at a slower pace. Having 7 things to choose from in a 3-year-old that's never been at school is overwhelming. So you may want to shorten that, especially at the beginning of the year, and then keep adding centers as you think the child is ready for it. The materials in the center may also want to be altered slightly. Probably the easiest example of that is in the block area. With a 4-year-old class, they love Legos. The 3-year-olds probably should be using Duplos for at least the beginning of the year. The Legos are awful small, and we don't want those to end up in the mouth. So it is often we walk into 3-year-old classes and you'll see Duplos used for the majority of the year. You will notice that in both age groups, there should be a classroom daily schedule that includes the words with pictures and icons for each activity. That is true of both of them. And but the routines and the transitions may take a tad more time with a 3-year-old. I think I skipped one. The centers we talked about earlier should be linked to the theme or unit or project that the children are learning about. And at times it is preferable for 3-year-olds to make those themes or units or projects a tad simpler. Let me give you an example. Let's say you are in the middle of the theme on transportation. It might be good for the 3-year-olds to learn cars, boats, airplanes. For the 4-year-olds, of course, with cars, they could do several kinds of cars. They could do a taxi, they could do a bus. I mean, there's differences. In a boat, they could learn sailboat versus motorboat. So that gives you an example of you're using the same theme in both age levels, but the theme is made slightly simpler for the 3-year-olds. And then obviously the classroom displays should be mostly children's work in both 3s and 4s classrooms, and the outdoor environment should be age appropriate for both age groups also. We want to try an activity now to help us especially try to learn a little bit more about the learning environment. So I'm going to show you a picture. This is a picture of a writing center in a pre-kindergarten classroom. And we want to ask, how could a teacher make this center that you see on the slide more appropriate for a 3-year-old class? I'd love for you to type in your suggestions if you can, and we'll read some of them. So look at that activity and see what could you do with that writing center to make it a little more simpler. I see someone has said label it with words and pictures. Yes, yes. Actually, that should be done in both age groups, but it is really important that you use pictures if you're working with 3-year-olds. I also see that some of you have said the paper should be at the level of the child. Yeah, even this table might be too tall for a 3-year-old. So if you were buying this, you would want to definitely make sure that your 3-year-olds could use it. Look how far away the scissors are. You know, they're, first of all, you might want to consider not having scissors at the beginning of the year. We don't want everyone going home in the 3-year-old class with short hair. Just the height of the paper and other materials there may be a little bit too high for 3-year-olds. Oh, okay, I see a really good suggestion. You might want to add markers and pens that are fatter for the smaller children. So I'm sure you know that they make different sizes of crayons, and often in the 3s classroom, those students are using the fatter crayons, and the 4-year-olds might use the fat crayons at the beginning of the year, but they quickly move to the skinnier ones. Great suggestions. All right, let's do another learning center. This is a science learning center. It looks pretty seasonal for right now too, even though it sort of feels like we're in winter now, here in Austin at least. So look at this center and tell me, how could it be altered to fit pre-K 3 a little better? Okay, I see someone said, you notice there's a magnifying glass there. She is suggesting that you might use a magnifying glass box. I'm not sure if you've seen those, but they're bigger. There's more area to look through, and you can put bigger items in them. That's a great suggestion. Utilizing more board books. So you will notice there's several books there. None of them are board books. 3-year-olds are a little rough, especially at the beginning of the year on books. So it might be good at this time of the year to use a little more board books. I would suggest that there's probably just too much stuff in here. It might be wise to have only leaves out for several days, and then only pine cones out for several days, only seeds out for several days, and to make the books match that. So again, it's just the idea of taking something that is totally appropriate for a 4-year-old and making it a tad simpler. There's another suggestion that the Learning Center looks more like a display, which I think I would agree, and make it a little more hands-on. Yeah, this a little bit says don't touch me, and you don't want to do that with 3-year-olds. You really don't want to do that with 4-year-olds either. Okay, great ideas. So some things to consider when you're looking at the learning environment is all areas of the pre-kindergarten classroom and the outdoor environment can be made simpler for younger students if needed. You might consider adjusting the concepts that are being explored within the theme or unit, and think about adjusting those concepts, scaffolding them down for the pre-K3 room. And you also want to consider the routines and the transitions as in elevated importance when you're working with younger children. Okay, Cassie's going to take it from here.
Okay, next we're going to discuss enrollment. Again, pre-K4 and pre-K3 are on opposite sides of the slide, and you can see that the differences are in orange. For pre-K4, a school district must offer a pre-K class once the district identifies 15 or more eligible children who are at least 4 by September 1st of the school year. For 4-year-olds, waitlists or lotteries may not be established. Pre-K is just like any other grade. If a child is eligible and the family wants him or her to attend pre-K, then that child must be served. So it's just like if a 5th grader came and they were eligible, if they lived within the boundaries, then you would have to serve that child. It's the same for pre-K. If the child is eligible, then they must be served. For pre-K3, a school district may offer pre-K once the district identifies 15 or more eligible children who are at least 3 by September 1st of the school year. So it's not required. And since it's not required, waitlists and lotteries may be established under district policy. So for example, if your district decides to open 5 3-year-old classes and they are full, you could start a wait list if additional 3-year-olds expressed interest in attending after that, but that would not be the case for 4-year-olds. Next, we're going to discuss eligibility. Students enrolled in free public pre-kindergarten must meet one of the eligibility criteria on this slide, and this is for both 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds. And these are the same criteria that you all are familiar with, so I won't read them out for you here, but feel free to reference this slide if you have any questions. So for pre-K4, students must meet one of the eligibility criteria on the previous slide, and they must be 4 years of age by September 1st. For pre-K3, students must meet one of the eligibility criteria on the previous slide, and they must be 3 years of age by September 1st. One important thing to note is that students who are not potty trained or who have frequent bathroom accidents may not be excluded from eligibility. This is something that we hear often from districts, and so it's important to note that when you are enrolling children that they can't be excluded for this reason. Next, we will discuss attendance. Attendance for pre-K4 and pre-K3 is no different than any other grade level. So while it's optional to enroll in pre-kindergarten, once you are enrolled, the family must follow attendance rules as they would any other grade. Our next key area is teacher qualifications. There are not differences in requirements for pre-K4 and pre-K3. Teachers for both ages should be appropriately certified to teach pre-kindergarten and have an additional qualification. For today, we're not going to discuss the additional qualifications referenced in Rider 78 on this webinar, but if you have questions about that, don't hesitate to reach out. Our contact information is listed towards the end of this presentation, so feel free to contact us if you have any questions about that. There are some things to consider as far as teacher qualifications. So while there's no differences in requirements, you might want to consider hiring teachers who have experience with young children, like at a child care center or in another setting where they've served 3 or 4-year-olds. You might want to consider looking for teachers who are skilled at engaging in warm, nurturing relationships with students, who are knowledgeable of child development and the developmental milestones of the age of the students in the classroom, who are knowledgeable of the importance of routines, transitions, and self-care, and who are able to scaffold students' learning. Children develop best when they have secure, consistent relationships with responsive adults and opportunities for positive relationships with peers. So it's important to keep those things in mind when you're hiring teachers for both your pre-K4 and pre-K3 classroom. Our next key area is ratios. There are no differences in requirements for pre-K4 and pre-K3. LEA should attempt to maintain a ratio of 11:1. There's not statute regarding pre-kindergarten class size or student-to-teacher ratio, but at a minimum, districts are encouraged to maintain ratios that do not exceed 22:1. And while there's no differences in the requirements, you may want to consider lower ratios and smaller classroom sizes. Lower student-to-teacher ratios can be helpful during routines, transitions, and instructional time. I think anyone who has worked with young children or who might be a parent know that things like toileting, washing hands, and assisting with meals can take a lot of time and attention. So it can be more manageable if you have lower ratios and smaller classroom sizes to handle those things. And smaller class sizes also allow teachers to better differentiate instruction, scaffold learning, give attention to students, and provide extra support to students. The last key area we will discuss is data reporting. Data for 3 and 4-year-olds is required to be submitted to ECDS per the Texas Education Code, and the pre-kindergarten program requirements do not differentiate between the two ages, so the requirements are the same. Assessment results of 3-year-olds in a pre-K program should be submitted if they were assessed with an instrument from the commissioner's approved list. Now I'm going to hand it over to Tamala to wrap up.
All right, we'd like you to watch this webinar. It's only a couple of minutes. It is going to show us how important the first 5 years of life are. And we realize that those of you that are watching this webinar obviously know the benefits of pre-kindergarten, especially a high quality pre-kindergarten program. What we want you to pay attention to though, is what happens, all these benefits. Imagine the benefit of a child having 2 years of pre-kindergarten. Let's watch.
I'm Dr. Elizabeth Kilby, and I'm a consultant clinical psychologist working with children and families. And my real interest, my passion, is working with under fives and looking at the ways that they develop and what their strengths are.
Hi, my name is Dr. Sam Was. I'm a research scientist based at the University of Cambridge and the University of East London.
What really fascinates me is how young brains develop, because it's really tempting to think that a baby's brain is like a small adult brain, and it's really not. It's like a sponge. And their brains are developing at twice the speed. They're working through information twice as fast as adults.
So the brain is made up of billions and billions of cells called neurons. What happens in the first few years after we're born is that these neurons form this very rapid phase of development of their branches. So the branches that allow one neuron to talk to another. So it's like a forest coming into bloom. So a 2-year-old's brain has twice as many connections between cells as an adult's does. And then what happens in the first few years after that is that the used branches get maintained and the branches that aren't used get pruned away. So this is why it's really, really important that these early years, when all of these vital early stages of brain development are going on, during this time, we give as many different forms and types of stimulation to a young brain as we possibly can. Because all of the research suggests that this really has a big influence on which neurons get kept into the adult brain and which get pruned away.
What we worry about is if these connections aren't made, if this foundation is not there, this can affect children's learning and even their emotional development. And the consequences of this are far-reaching and can affect them into adult life. We can all work towards giving children the stimulation, the interaction, the engagement that helps them develop. I can't think of anything more significant than giving young people the best possible start in life. And we can all do this. It's so achievable. And I wonder if we can really start to think about the idea that playtime, interaction, talking, sharing, that's brain time. That's developing. That's exactly the skills that we need. And we can encourage everyone to get on board with this. Think of the gift we're giving this generation.
So imagine, I know I'm speaking to the choir here, but imagine the difference of 2 years of a high quality pre-kindergarten program beginning at the age of 3, and imagine the potential of altering a child's life. So we want to now talk a little bit about some resources that you may be interested in. There are links here for the Texas Pre-K guidelines, for the commissioner's list of approved pre-kindergarten assessment instruments that we talked about earlier, for the instructional materials list, for the program self-assessments, for the infant, toddler, and 3-year-old early learning guidelines. And we have a vertical alignment resource that we failed to mention but you might want to take a look at this. This vertical alignment goes from birth through and even includes the TEKS. So I think that would be of interest to many of you.
Okay, so at this time, we'd like to open it up for questions. We realize it's time for the webinar to end, but Tamil and I are going to stay on for up to 15 minutes if anyone has questions. If there are a lot of questions and you need to go, or if you ask a question and we're not able to get to it, please type it in and either Tamila or I will email you a response tomorrow. So be sure to get your question in and we will respond to it either today or tomorrow. And also, you're welcome to email us at any time. Our contact information is listed here. So feel free to either type in a question in the question box or email us with any questions. Otherwise, thank you so much for being on our webinar. Again, this will be recorded and posted on our webinar page, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon.